I'm just going to share my screen and see if I can give you a bit of a perspective on what the Assess project is all about. So first, the team. So Dr. Chris McCabe is a co-founder. He's actually on vacation in Italy at the moment and unable to join us, but he is a former colleague of mine at my previous role, which was with a research institute in Edmonton, Alberta, in the health economics space, working very closely with the innovation community. He's now on faculty at the Queen's University in Belfast, and he's an author of several guidelines in Canada and in the UK on health technology assessment. You've met me, you've met Brian. Our lead strategic advisor is Sir Andrew Dillon, who is the founding CEO of NICE, which is the UK health technology assessment body. He's actually an interesting story. He approached us after we launched and said, he liked what we were doing in terms of helping find sort of the easy yes innovation, those things that have a lot of potential, and helping shape their evidence development such that when they landed on the desks of organizations such as his, it represented good value and wasn't sort of a waste of resources, financial, clinical, patient, et cetera, and wanted to really contribute to this project to see if we can sort of set up a support resource to ensure that sort of the right technologies with the right evidence are moving through the R&D pipeline. So we're happy to have him on board as a strategic advisor. And we've got a number of technical advisors from different parts of the world. We were chatting before about time zones and meetings. Well, we've got Dan Ohlendorf, who is at Tufts, and he was the former chief scientific officer at ICER, which is a major health technology assessment body in Boston. We've got Paul Logelli, who is in New Zealand on staff at the University of Auckland. We have Mike Paulden, who's on staff as a professor at the University of Alberta, and Richard Edlin, who is like Paula, he's in New Zealand at the University of Auckland. And so we've got a sort of a wide range of folks here with practical experience, academic experience, some of the textbook authors in the space on how to do economic evaluations and health technology assessments. So we're very happy to have them guiding our project and guiding the methods that our assessor community uses for completion of the analyses that they do. Just to advance. So basically our big, hairy, audacious goal. So what we're trying to do is help the life sciences ecosystem, and we define them as the research community, the tech transfer community, incubators, accelerators, the funders, really devote its energy, expertise, and investment to those high-value products that have the evidence as they progress for improving patient outcomes, improving system efficiency, and really making them attractive for payers at the end of the day. And we think in doing this will help improve health through promoting investment in the right technologies and the right evidence development at the right time, ultimately to support patient access to innovative therapies. So our approach is we facilitate connection of tech transfer offices and other innovators that work with tech transfer offices with access to specialized health technology assessment expertise. And really the goal here is to strengthen the evaluation of candidate health technologies to build the business case for investment, time, money, other investments that take place. And the way we do this is through a secure web platform, which we call the Assess platform, that has a pool of assessors from various different walks of life that have been vetted thoroughly by our advisor community that ultimately are matched to projects that are basically assessments of various aspects of technology on the basis of their expertise in that type of technology, the therapeutic area, the skill set that's required, be it an economist versus something else, and also the target market of interest. And we realize that individuals can't be all things to all different types of technologies. And so we've built this rather large community so that we can assign the right resources to the different questions that TTOs and other innovators have at their during their R&D and commercialization journey, so we can get them the right informed answers from this large pool of resources that we've assembled. So just to unpack health technology assessment a bit, I think most are familiar with HTA or health technology assessment as something that considers clinical effectiveness, safety, cost effectiveness, but it's typically done at the end of a product development cycle and typically done for reimbursement decision-making purposes. There are HTA bodies like NICE, from which Sir Andrew Dillon was the founding CEO. They look at the evidence and they say, reimburse or don't reimburse, or reimburse with these conditions. This is completed by not-for-profit groups like ICER in the US, or groups like Kaiser Permanente would have in-house HTA resources. But what we're trying to do with this project is help reimagine where HTA can play a role within the TTOs and within the innovation community, from the startups to others that are working with early stage technology. So what we're trying to do is bring the methods and the insights from this discipline much earlier into the process to help with the understanding of really two key things. And this list might grow, and that's kind of the conversation we're going to have today. But we think there's a lot of opportunity here with HTA to support understanding of commercial potential of technology, and also kind of that evidence journey to bring that product to market. What is the time? What is the cost? What is the probability of bringing something to market? And we think collectively those two bullet points there represent really a decent business case or due diligence exercise to help TTOs and others understand really what is that return potential and what is the investment to get that return. So as mentioned, we work through the Assess platform. I'm going to show you a few screenshots in a minute to help you understand a bit more about what Brian primarily has built. But what we do is we provide the services to the platform, and we match the assessment requirements to the most qualified expert reviewers. And we do things on a fairly standard basis, and I'll show you what we've come up with thus far, which may or may not be the be all end all in terms of what's needed by the TTOs, or we can do them on the basis of custom queries. I think Kevin recently has called them micro queries, where there's questions that come up that we can send out to our community for a quick response. But everything is facilitated through this secure software platform to keep a low overhead, kind of minimize costs, and make things secure, confidential, and ultimately efficient in terms of the communications. So just to give you a sense of the assessor community, we have currently, and this is growing almost on a weekly basis with inquiries from different people out there as we mature. We have assessors that can look at 42 different markets. We have assessors that generally have more than 10 years of experience in health technology assessment, typically are MD or PhD level trained, representing various different disciplines. So as you can imagine, you might need an economist to take a look at a project alongside someone from a clinical or a pharmacy perspective. We've got people with different areas of technology type expertise. So medical device is clearly different than, a diagnostic screening test, for example. So we've got, the different technology expertise areas represented. And a lot of people come from different backgrounds, be it academic or applied HTA, guideline development groups, et cetera. So a broad range of folks that give us a lot of opportunity to really thoughtfully match the assessor resources to the needs of the project. So how it works kind of high level is, and you'll see in a moment, we've created a portal for the TTOs, which is kind of their private portal where they can request and actually queue projects that come up that are questions or due diligence reports they'd like to receive around candidate health technology disclosures that they've received. There's a process to assess feasibility and suitability. Do we have the right questions that are being asked? Do we have the right assessors that can answer them? So we want to screen out things that aren't really in scope for us. An example of that might be a technology that would be intended to be sold to a pharmaceutical company, like a reagent. That's not really where we have expertise. That's maybe a different area of expertise than we have. Assuming the feasibility and suitability is confirmed, we have a mechanism to sort of pay for the project. And then we have this back and forth of collecting different layers of information. And it may be that the TTO folks are providing this, and it may be that the R&D folks, like the disclosures, are providing this. And there's a mechanism to actually bring in different users into that TTO portal to collect information from people that have the answers to the questions that we're asking. And ultimately, with that data gathering exercise, which is very structured, we then match the project to the right assessors. They then follow a series of structured methods that have been developed by our technical advisors and our chief scientific officer, which is Dr. McCabe, ultimately to produce a confidential report within about 4 to 8 weeks. And again, this could be for a large report, and I'll show you what we think that could look like in a second, but it also could be for kind of the micro questioning as things come up and, hey, what's the regulatory pathway for this product in New Zealand or in the US or other markets? Which would be a shorter time frame than the 4 to 8 weeks, and probably different resources than we might use for the full due diligence report. But that's our general framework for how we work, and then we've kind of built that into the platform to make it all go. So we think that the service can really help with that business case, and this is probably the largest of the service set that we've imagined thus far, which would be, there's a disclosure, there's a question about whether it's commercially viable. attractive. There's a question about whether it can be implemented feasibly into care pathways. Then there's a question about what would it look like to bring it to market. And so we think that these types of questions could be well answered by the assessor community that we've assembled on the platform. And this is just an example of a report outline this would be about a 30-page report that would describe, what is the technology and various characteristics of it. This is likely going to be reported in whole or in part by the TTO or the disclosures that they're working with. But for completeness, we want to have a full report, understanding it might be shared with the investment community or commercial partners. And then we get into various aspects of assessing the commercial potential, and I'll unpack those in a moment. But we look at different dimensions of what we call headroom to understand the commercial potential. And then we look at anticipated reimbursement pathways, and then describe the type of evidence that's expected in order to ultimately get a success within those pathways. And we even speak to standard of care to say, ultimately approval and reimbursement is one thing, but actual clinical adoption is a separate thing. So looking at, similar types of technologies and what was required to influence guidelines or standard of care is something we do as well, to say this is how it would actually be used. Our goal here is to be as conclusive as we can to come up with a clear statement of what we are seeing as the assessors that work on the platform as the commercial potential, including some range of pricing, if that's something that we can feasibly sort of extract from the work. And then again, that time cost probability for the evidence development. But again, we'll talk about this a bit more, because this is kind of what we think would be helpful. And it may be that you tell us there's other things that are this is not helpful, or there's other things that are more helpful. So just to give you a bit more color into how we would work. So the different aspects of headroom address commercial potential. So unsurprisingly, the first is really the unmet medical needs. So is there significant opportunity to improve health? Cost headroom is really about, is there opportunity to reduce cost of care for the payer, which would be an indicator of whether the technology is likely to be attractive to payers end of the day. Economic efficiency headroom is intended to get at the range of prices that would be considered acceptable through various different methodologies to help give a sense of the value-based price of the technology. To be clear, this is not an economic modeling service, which we can also do, but this is more of a value-based estimate of what we think the range of technology prices would be in the market. The value headroom is considering any special considerations. So rare diseases, things that are currently untreatable, they typically have a premium associated with them, and they might have different pathways that they go through from a regulatory perspective or even reimbursement. So we consider that. And then crucially, we look at the enablers and barriers to implementation. If something completely breaks workflow, that's a problem. And so the actual ability to address the headroom is heavily influenced by implementation. So we have to get into that and understand sort of the implications of implementation. Excuse me. So that all concludes with our assessment of commercial potential. And then we look at the evidence requirements, again, given the likely reimbursement pathways, and describe things like, the type of research, type of trials, clinical endpoints, magnitude of effect that should be considered in terms of satisfying regulatory and reimbursement considerations, and then try to quantify that with time, cost, and probability to give you a real sense of, like I said, that evidence journey. How do you go from, sort of the stage of the technology, which is quite likely very, very early, all the way to market? We think collectively this is a reasonable due diligence report, which can inform a number of different discussions and negotiations, which we'll talk to in a moment. Last slide before we look at the platform. This is a little bit future oriented, but our goal, we think at this point, and things may change, but our goal is likely to bring in the commercial partner investment community at some point. If we have hundreds of these that have been completed, we think that the investment community might like to come in and look at some of the technology assessment metrics that represent the way that the assessor community is looking at the technologies, some of the key conclusions around the opportunities with the technologies that we worked on, to help them really identify, evaluate, and triage promising products, and maybe eventually with TTO permission, see some of the reports. And so hopefully, if this is something of interest, it would accelerate the ability to connect with those commercial partners and with VCs and others, and give them something that they would likely view as a credible third-party assessment of the technology, and really help them engage in conversations with the TTOs about licensing and investment and other things. So looking at the platform here, I've taken some screenshots as opposed to having you sort of watch me click through and log in and log out as different users. So hopefully that's okay. But this would be an example of an organization level dashboard. So example TTO, and this is the portal for the TTO. And basically what we're trying to do here is give the TTO administrator, so someone on your side, sort of an at-a-glance look at what's happening within the TTO with respect to projects they're working on with us. And so we would have things like projects in queue, in the backlog, those have been completed, users, you might add up, like directors, managers, others into the TTO organization level platform. But to give you a real sense of what's going on and what's happened, and then a list of the projects that are taking place. So this is really the portal at the organization level. If we break that down to say a project, so I just mocked up here test 2, which would be a project. This is a test project. It's a description. This is our our framework to essentially onboard projects and to manage them. So you can see our steps. We have the evaluation I mentioned before, which is about kind of confirming feasibility. We have a design phase where we are starting to identify the roles that are involved, because it may be more than just the TTO administrator. It may be bringing in folks from the research labs as well. We're gathering client input, which would be their way of expressing, that the 300-page document they might have, which describes their technology, their way of kind of structuring that and bringing it down to something that is digestible by the TTO and digestible by us and our assessors. And then ultimately moving into the assessment phase, which is sharing that information with the assessors so that they can actually do their work to provide the assessment, and then reporting out, reviewing, and completing a project. So this is kind of how we work through the project. You can see at the bottom here, we've built this, or I should say Brian's built this really as a task-based platform, so that we're able to keep track of probably at scale, a number of projects that are working through various different organizations. And in things like we have the task, we have the owner of the task, the status, the due date, all those sort of things to really help manage these things from honestly a project management perspective. And then this just an example of something that a TTO manager or potentially the inventor R&D lab folks would receive, which would be a structured way to gather input from them, like I mentioned, on their technology. So we've got some ideas that we would want to know about the product and the target market and the health condition it's intended to treat, who's going to use it, where they might use it, those sort of questions to really inform the work of the assessors and help them really understand what the product is and what its value proposition might be. And once they have that, this is a view for the assessors. So they have, you can see here kind of the sections of the report, and I'll show you an example of that in a sec, but they have an actual workspace where they see that client input and they can actually work right within this platform. They don't take things off platform. It's all very secure. And they work right in this platform to ultimately write the report, following the methods, following the structure to produce essentially the assessment at the end. And just working back to this initial screen you saw, which is again, the organization level. This is the TTO private portal. You can see along the side here, we've tried to build a lot of flexibility in, because we're sort of seeing two models. We're seeing a model where we might facilitate sort of setting up and managing a project when one's requested. So you can see this button here would be new project requested, please. We would then guide through the gathering of the input from the right individuals to assigning assessors, to managing the assessment, to reporting out. Or it may be in the future that the TTOs want to do this themselves. They want to actually, without even talking to us, work through their portal, get information from their from their R&D community, and build a backlog, prioritize which ones we might work on first. And so along the side here, you can see that we have some templates. And so we've come up with ideas on the information we think we should gather. And we've built the flexibility for all these things to be customized. So questionnaires that are sent to the disclosure, the information they provide back, all that can be customized by either us or you, ultimately to the right information that is required, the assessments, the actual structure of a report, and what the assessors work on and the objectives they have and the methods they follow. All that can be actually managed by you as well and customized, and sort of, I've shown you an example of our table of contents, but all that can be modified by, again, us or you. Reports here is essentially, we would imagine if we had a relationship where we did X number per year under, say, an annual fee model, there's probably need to report back on activity, what was done, how many assessments were done, what are if there's any KPIs, things that are important from a reporting perspective, we can build templates for that. So this dashboard would actually grow, and you'd see different metrics that are more of the reporting type that could be downloaded to a PDF and shared with whomever, from a sort of a proper management of the relationship perspective. And then project types as well. There's different projects that come up. I've shown you an example of a due diligence. Other requests we've had in the past are for, say, help us find the right clinical application for this technology. And so that would be a different project type. We can build it, you can build it, but my point is we built in the flexibility ultimately for you to do it, so that this portal is something that you actually can at some point work in and function in. So I just got a couple of slides and then we'll get into the discussion. So I appreciate your patience as I have stepped through, I think, a lot of information, but part of this work with AUTM is to help us validate our assumptions and help us understand, what the value might be of this and how we can strengthen that value so we can better support you. And part of it is sort of, we have some uncertainties about what we know, and we'd like to sort of resolve those if we can. So starting with our assumptions here, we think TTOs make decisions on the commercial potential for a wide range of life sciences technologies, and that's probably challenged by staff bandwidth and probably challenged by breadth of expertise. And I know there's in-house resources that are life sciences focused, but we think that, having an understanding of medical device in the cardiovascular space is sufficiently different from having an understanding of immuno-oncology therapies. So it's tough to be sort of fluent in various different markets and technology types and therapeutic areas. So we think, and I've heard there's some TTOs here with the staff of one. We think there's probably a challenge there in terms of the breadth of expertise and bandwidth to work with the various projects that have come forward. We think decisions influence investment of both time and resources. Number 4 here is we think that decisions to focus on the highest potential technologies would improve TTO performance metrics over time. So things like number of licensing agreements, revenue from licensing agreements. So we're not really thinking of this as something that might offset TTO costs, although it could, patent application being avoided, that sort of thing. But we're really thinking, again, in line with our BHAG, which is, how do we help the TTOs to focus on the right projects and generate the right evidence and the right information to share with commercial partners to really help the long-term TTO performance. And so that's something that we think is a critical assumption that we have, and would love to get your input on whether that's accurate or not, or if it's more, there's more of an interest in sort of short-term cost savings, because that's a bit of a different discussion. And then finally, we think sort of a more rigorous third-party assessment of commercial potential would result in higher probability of securing resources for the project, for the TTO, and likely an improved ability to attract commercial partners. And so this is something that we have a question on in a minute about kind of who should be the one that commissions it. Should it be the VC? Should it be a licensing partner? Should it be the TTO? But our assumption at this stage is really that the TTO is in a strong position to actually negotiate if they've got something like this and would want that themselves, versus letting the VCs go and then have that insight that helps them negotiate better. So that's our assumption. I'm going to come back to these in a sec for the conversation, but just to sort of finish the last 2 slides, where we think we add value is, from a TTO informing perspective, commercial potential, the pathways, regulatory reimbursement, evidence required to commercialize, and the clinical applications of the highest value. We think in terms of informing / managing discussions and negotiations. We think a third-party report would be very helpful with commercial partners. We think it'd be very helpful with investors. We also think it'd be helpful with faculty. And I can understand from a TTO perspective, when there's prominent faculty that have fantastic science, it's probably difficult to have the conversation that something's not commercially viable. So we think this might help with those conversations as well. And then internal and external exchange. So I've seen in some of the feedback from the survey that was done by AUTM that sometimes the research teams come and they dump a stack of 300 pages. A lot of it's grant application stuff, and they say, "Here, can you commercialize this for us or help us commercialize it?" And that's tough, right? That's tough from a bandwidth and even just to get your head around it. So we think we have a very structured approach to helping gather information from that research group to put it into a framework or a structure that is useful to then think about it critically to understand its commercial potential.